Hello everyone. With Wrath the Lich King coming out, I've had a fair few of you ask if I could talk about the story of the expansion. It's most people's favorite, chock full of lore and revelations. It could be fun to do a global overview, this is what's going on, but since there's so much that's going on in the expansion, I probably won't be able to cover all of it. I'm going to do my best though, and I'm going to try my best to not make it sound like just the story of the Lich King. But let's begin with the setup. Since Warcraft 3, it's quite a while ago.
I'm sorry, Arthas. I can't watch you do this.
There, we have Arthas Menethil, a paladin and future king of Lordaeron. In his time, there's a plague spreading across the lands, pushed by the Archmage Kel'Thuzad and the Cult of the Damned. A plague that's designed to not just kill the citizens of Lordaeron, but also turn them into the undead. With his mentor Uther the Lightbringer and his beloved Jaina Proudmoore at his side, Arthas did his best to save his kingdom. But this quest for vengeance, it pushed him further and further into darkness, just as the Dreadlords and the Lich King had planned. Mal'Ganis haunted him to follow to the cold lands of Northrend, where our prince ran into his old friend and childhood mentor Muradin Bronzebeard. A warm reunion in the cold, but the prince would not let go of his mission. Not when his father told him to come back. He just burned the ships and made it so that nobody could go home, and not when the powerful weapon that they were after to slay Mal'Ganis turned out to be cursed.
I would gladly bear any curse to save my homeland.
Leave it be, Arthas. Forget this business and lead your men home.
Damn the men! Nothing shall prevent me from having my revenge, old friend. Not even you. Now, I call out to the spirits of this place. I will give anything or pay any price, if only you will help me save my people.
He just left Muradin for dead, all so that Arth could claim his vengeance upon Mal'Ganis. And then spend his time listening to the whispers of the Lich King Ner'zhul. You can actually see the broken ships and the spirits of the forgotten troops if you visit Dragonblight. Go a little bit further north and you'll run into the cave where he exchanged his Light's vengeance for Frostmourne. This old hammer, it can lead you on a legendary quest to forge Shadowmourne. Echoes of the past will reveal that Muradin's story didn't exactly end here. Instead of being slain, he was knocked out cold, and he woke up with amnesia. Now being the badass Bronzebeard that he is, he would then run into the local Frostborn dwarves of the Storm Peaks, and eventually become their king, because, that's how Bronzebeards do. But back to Arthas. Next time that we see him, he is transformed from Paladin into Death Knight, murdered a whole bunch of his troops and converted some of them into Death Knights as well. His ever-loyal captains, Valdek and Marwyn, will now be forever at his side.
Despair. So delicious.
What was begun with the plague in Lordaeron, Arthas is now finished with his scourge. He murdered his father, brought the high home of the High Elves low, murdering all that stood in his way, including their king and Ranger General Sylvanas Windrunner. She was brought back though as a Banshee, while the remaining High Elves would now call themselves Blood Elves, in honor of those who had fallen to the scourge. Eventually, the Lich King's powers would weaken, and he called his champion to come to Northrend to merge with him. This is what gave Sylvanas the opportunity to set herself free, grab her body, and nearly stop Wrath the Lich King from ever happening. Arthas wouldn't go down that easily though, not with allies with the now Lich Kel'Thuzad or the Nerubian King Anub'arak at his side. The race was on to reach Icecrown Citadel first, a race that was against Illidan, Kael'thas and Lady Vashj. It would be a 1v1 duel designed in the future for all of Azeroth. And Illidan was left behind to die in the snow, while Arthas climbed to the top of Icecrown and claimed his destiny.
Now, we are one.
And that's where we left it. Arthas freezing his butt off on the frozen throne. What a world, it kept on turning. Now he might have proclaimed that they were one, but that's not exactly true. There was the entity known as the Lich King, the Ner'zhul part, that was in conflict with Arthas. Then there was also the former good part of himself, his humanity, now sickly and neglected. And finally, there was a third influence, one from far away, not of this world, lurking in the darkness of the Shadowlands, where it would remain hidden and not actually play an active part during this expansion. Arthas would spend his time reflecting on his life, his road to damnation, and eventually come to the conclusion that he didn't want to play ball with Ner'zhul. so he stabbed him. In his mind, but still, he also stabbed his childlike good side. He would even carve out his own heart after his fight with Illidan, no longer wanting that piece of humanity bringing him down. And what awoke on the frozen throne, it was something else than what had gone to sleep. No one would now tell him what to do. The power, it was his and his alone. Now that is only I. I am the Lich King, and I am ready.
Should he rise again from the frozen north, all of Azeroth will face his wrath.
Doing this whole transformation thing, it did take a bit of time, and even though the Lich King was now immobile on his frozen throne, his units and champions, they still worked on increasing their territory, fortifying their defenses, and adding to their units. Just imagine that you are a poor little Tusker, and you're trying to survive in the lands so incredibly cold and overrun by the undead. But the Tusker, they would not shiver out of cold. They would shiver with fear, for when he dreams, they knew the storms would be more than just storms, more than just natural. The influence of the Lich King, it touched nearly all of Northrend, spreading out from his frozen throne, which was improved upon with Sarenites. Sarenites, that's the blood of the old god Yogg-Saron, who is imprisoned within the Titan complex of Ulduar. There were hints and speculation back in the day about Yogg-Saron's blood and influence potentially having its effect on Arthas and the undead, but they haven't really gone further with that idea. Now we do see a connection between Yogg-Saron and the Lich King, a connection through the Nerubians. They evolved under the old god's influence, they worshipped it, but being turned into undead, it means you have no choice but to serve a different king. Anub'arak found that out fast enough, and the old Nerubian kingdoms, as well as the tunnels, they spread far and wide underneath Northrend. While the living kind, they still fight the war to reclaim what was lost. Like Cthulhu before him, Yogg-Saron has been trying very hard to break out of his prison. He's already been busy putting his plans in motion, like infecting the Titan Forged with the so-called Curse of Flesh. This curse, as the name implies, it literally gave them flesh. It weakened them, made them more vulnerable to the old god's corruption. That's how, for example, the Mechanomes turned into gnomes, or the Urvan turned into the dwarves, or the Vrykul, they turned into the humans.
I hate your damn gods!
Some of those Vrykul would eventually curse their titanic gods for letting them be corrupted like this. They would ally themselves to the Lich King. Meanwhile, the defense of Ulduar, they're weakening, and its keepers, those left behind to keep Yogg-Saron locked away, they're corrupted as well. That's why you see remnants of Urvan or giants fighting in these massive wars. There's Loken, aka Loki, fighting against his brother Thorim, aka Thor. There's a lot of that mythology used right here in Ulduar, and by the time that we show up in Northrend, we'll make sure that nothing escapes the prison.
The time to strike at the head of the beast will soon be upon us.
From the Vrykul, the Lich King had learned about the Valkyr, and after a few failed attempts, he managed to make his own variation. Amongst Vrykul culture, some began to see it as a great honor to be transformed into these spectral beings, able to travel beyond the veil. They would then judge those amongst their own people, and transform those worthy to join their ranks into the Jimmerjar, and those unworthy, they were turned into the Vargul. And not just the Vrykul were transformed. His unit productions, they cranked out more beings like massive skeletons, constructs, even frostworms. There was also the ones mighty blue dragon Sindragosa, consort to Malygos, who had died over 10,000 years ago. She's brought back by Arthas and added to the ranks, and now yells at us from the login screen. Then we got Kilfa Sunstrider and the Blood Elves. They tried to claim vengeance upon Arthas. They tried to stop him from reaching the frozen throne. And they'd failed. They left quite a few bodies behind. As rewards, he took their dead, transformed some of them into the vampiric Senlane, with Blood Queen Lanafel to now lead them. You might be lucky enough to find yourself a battered hilt. You can reforge her legendary sword Quel'Dalar within the Sunwell itself.
My son, the day you were born, the very forests of Lordaeron whispered the name Arthas.
So yeah, as you can tell, while the world of Azeroth kept on spinning, and we went through our adventures of Classic and the Burning Crusade, Arthas the Lich King, he's been growing in power. They already poked at us with Noxramas during Classic. They poked at Light Hope Chapel and the Plaguelands. But the heroes, they ventured through his halls and they got rid of Kel'Thuzad. Not permanently, unfortunately. Their heroic greed, it allowed his phylactery to escape, giving him another chance to strike out. Now, they weren't ready to give up on conquering the holy place of Light's Hope, though. Any of you that have gone through the Death Knight starting campaign, you'll know that the Lich King, he's put you on the task of claiming the lands for him, starting with pushing out the Scarlet Crusaders. They would set sail to Northrend before us, form the Scarlet Onslaught, and try to bring victory to the cause. Unfortunately, as so often happens with the Scarlet Crusaders, they were infiltrated from within by a Dreadlord, none other than Mal'Ganis himself. Arthas striking him down didn't exactly end him for good, and Mal'Ganis wasn't going to let that go. Once we reached Northrend, we uncovered his infiltration and we stopped him. The Dreadlord, he promised us that we would never win a war against the Lich King without him, but sadly, he never showed up for the finale. After getting rid of the Crusaders, the Death Knights then focused their efforts on the chapel again. Not to win, as it turned out. The Lich King, he didn't particularly care what happened to his Death Knights, as long as they would draw out the legendary paladin Tyrion Fortring. He's a great ally to the Lights, and a foe that Arthas quickly wanted to remove from the boards. He should have been a bit nicer to his Death Knights, though, as being thrown away like that, it just didn't sit right. Darian Mograine, wielder of the corrupted Ashbringer, he throws it at Tyrion, whose touch, it cleanses the blade, restores it to the pure, holy weapon it was when Darian's father wielded it. One strike with the Holy Ashbringer was all it took to show Arthas that retreat, it might be the better option.
On this day, I call for a union. The Argent Dawn and the Order of the Silver Hand will come together as one. We will succeed where so many before us have failed. We will take the fight to Arthas, and we will tear down the walls of Icecrown! The Argent Crusade comes for you, Arthas!
And so, the Death Knights of the Ebonblades, they joined either the Alliance or the Horde. While Tyrion, he leads the Argent Crusade as we finally set off into Northrend to see with our own eyes what Ar's been up to. You got to pick from which zone you wanted to invade, but lore-wise, it's the Alliance that came in from the Howling Fjords, while the Horde went through the Borean Tundra. AKA Boring Tundra, as most call his own, and honestly, it's not without reason, but it does have its moments. I do still love the fact that as an alliance, they recognize your previous accomplishments and let you skip the line. On the Horde side, you get a glimpse at Kel'Thuzad, some awesome dialogue between Varrock Sourfang and Garrosh Hellscream. If you stick around for it, you'll learn more about what life has been like for the orcs, life after demonic blood, but yeah, if you compare it to Howling Fjord, it doesn't really compare. There we see the Forsaken hard at work at testing out and perfecting their blights. Their Banshee Queen, Sylvanas Windrunner, she has brought them all together with a singular goal in mind: claim vengeance for what Arthas had done to them. For that goal, she has given Putris permission to do what they do best: design a weapon that would not only hurt the undead, but also the living. The perfect weapon to be used against the Lich King. But little did she know, betrayal was looming in the shadows. As their campaign proceeded, the Alliance and Horde, they grew a bit closer again, as fighting against a common enemy often does. As they pushed into Dragonblight, and then tried to do a quick strike through the Wrathgate, Bolvar Fordragon, he led the Alliance, while Dranosh, son of Varrock Sourfang, he led the Horde in a combined strike.
I was wondering if you'd show up.
I couldn't let the Alliance have all the fun today.
That's when Grand Apothecary Putris saw his opportunity, and they let the Blight fly, causing massive damage to Arthas, but also creating many casualties amongst the Alliance and the Horde. Dranosh had already been one-shot by Arthas, his soul claimed by Frostmourne, and here Bolvar died to the Blight, but the Red Dragonflight isn't quite finished with him yet. More on that later. Meanwhile, back home, Sylvanas has lost her Undercity to the betrayal of Putris and the Dreadlord Varimafras. Some had wondered if she knew about the attack on Wrathgate, if she perhaps even ordered it. But no, she wanted the Blight to be created. She definitely wanted to strike out at Arthas, but the way that the attack went down at the Wrathgate, it was not her plan. Good luck trying to convince the world of that, though. Now it was the combined efforts of the Horde and the Alliance that gave her the city of Lordaeron back. But as you can imagine, they didn't exactly leave things on friendly terms.
At the Wrathgate, the Horde's partnership killed more of our men than the Scourge. I'm done with your Horde.
But don't worry, cooler heads will prevail and keep their eyes on the real threats. Like Tyrion, who has made landfall within the Howling Fjords. He's on an undercover mission, separated from his beautiful Ashbringer to keep a low profile. The plan nearly backfires though, as the carrier, he falls to the undead, and we nearly lose the artifact with it. Tired of playing games, tired of trying to hide, Tyrion steps up and he marches to Icecrown, having to fight for every bit of land that we claim. Once there, he nearly makes the ultimate sacrifice as he strikes down Arthas' hearts, which does deal with quite a bit of damage to the Lich King. Not enough, sadly, to finish the job. That was gonna take the united might of the worlds. But who do you bring? Against a foe like the Lich King, any that falls in battle, they rise up, they become your enemy instead. Only the finest will be allowed to venture into Icecrown. So to figure out who was ready and who was worthy, Tyrion would hold a little tournament. Before we find out the winners and move on to strike at the heart of Icecrown Citadel, let's first take a step back and not forget about the other stories and raids that we went through. Like I said, there's a lot going on. In Storm Peaks, we reunited with Muradin and we met up with the Keepers of Ulduar, dealing with the corruption inside, despite the factions being at war with each other, and making sure that the planets would not be purged.
Citizens of Dalaran, raise your eyes to the skies and observe.
In Dragonblight, we learned that the bones of Galakrond, progenitor of all dragons, they rest here. And the Lich King, he wants to bring it back in undeath. At least, that's how they sold it back then. Dragonblight is still the dragon graveyard, the place where dragons want to go when they die. But they have clarified that Galakrond was not like the progenitor of the dragons. Rather, he was the first threat that the aspects had to unite against. And in exchange, proving their worth, showing the world could use defenders like them, they and many of the proto-dragon kinds, they were transformed into the first dragons. Wyrmrest Temple was crafted to serve as the heart of dragons' culture, a sanctuary where they could gather and discuss their activities. You can also find entries to the hatcheries on the lower levels, but above all, Wyrmrest Temple, it would stand as a symbol of their unity. Sadly, a unity that would not last forever. Over at the Nexus, there lives Malygos, the blue dragon aspect and guardian of magic. He'd gone insane, but recently he got his sanity back, and looking around with clear eyes, he realized that mortals, they've been abusing magic, and the best course of action in his mind would be take the magic away, drawing all of it into the Nexus, which is why the magical city of Dalaran, they actually flew out to Northrend to fight in this so-called Nexus war. Getting access and just confront Malygos wasn't going to be as easy as just stepping inside though. We were going to need a key that's in the possession of a blue dragon. A blue dragon like Sephiron, the same Sephiron resurrected by Arthas during Warcraft 3. They stand guard within the floating citadel of Naxxramas. So while we're there, we of course took care of the threats as we did back in Classic. With the key in hand and Queen Alexstrasza's aid, heroes managed to stop the threat of Malygos, slaying her fellow aspects and leaving the blue dragon flight without a leader. Worries for later. For now, we got a Lich King to deal with. In nearly every zone, we felt his influence. Sometimes, literally showing up and taunting us in our faces. He could finish us off right now, but he's not going to. You see, he has bigger plans. He edges us on to meet him at the top of Icecrown. Even the Argent tournament wasn't safe, but with our champion selected, it was time to knock down the doors of Icecrown. Meanwhile, Jaina and Sylvanas, they made use of the opportunity and led a small party through the frozen halls in a desperate attempt to separate the Lich King from Frostmourne. His powers had grown immensely though, and they just barely managed to get out alive. This was not going to be done by sneaking around, it was not going to be done with surprise attacks. It was time to show Arthas what we got.
Look now to your defenses, my son, for the champions of justice gather at your gates.
A bonus mission added to it all. It turns out that both our Dragon has been brought back to life by the Dragon Flames. This was back at the Wrathgate, and he's been enjoying the Lich King's company, or torture as some would call it. He's still holding on though. Imagine what rescuing him would mean for the factions. They were so desperate to reach the top first and make things right that they kinda started to shoot at each other with their airships. I guess that, their hearts were in the right place. Sadly, Dranos' soul had been claimed by Frostmourne, already converted into a Death Knight. With heavy hearts, we were forced to end his suffering. and all of the most powerful units that the Lich King had to throw at us. Tyrion, with his mighty Ashbringer in hand, challenged Arthas, who said, "No, I'm not interested in you. You just sit in your block of ice as I test these champions of yours one last time. You have brought me the greatest fighting force Azeroth has ever known. You brought them right to my doorstep." And he did what he set out to do. He won. He one-shotted every single one of us. And he was just about ready to bring us back into his service.
Light, grant me one final blessing. Give me the strength to shatter these bonds. No more, Arthas! No more lives will be consumed by your hatred!
Free, at last. It is over, my son. This is the moment of reckoning. Rise up, champions of the light!
Now I stand, the lion before the lambs, and they do not fear. They cannot fear.
The light found Tyrion in his darkest hour, shattering Frostmourne and releasing the thousands of souls trapped inside, including that of his father, who brought us all back to life. While the spirits hold him up in the air, we finally put a stop to the wrath of the Lich King. But for Dragon, he would take up the charge to sit on the frozen throne, keep the undead in check, and that's pretty much what goes down during Wrath of the Lich King. At least some of the major parts, as I haven't even spoken about every single zone, or every little creature that we meet, or the raids that go down on the worm rests. This expansion, it packed a punch, and once you actually start paying attention to the quests given to you in the zones, you'll just see how much lore they're handing out, how much they put in each and every zone. This is the expansion that got me into the lore all those years ago. Or more specifically, that one Wrathgate cutscene, it sparked my interest. I wanted to know what the heck was going on, and before I knew it, we were deep into the scrolls of lore. It's honestly hard to convey how awesome it was to just deep dive with Bran Bronzebeard, learn more about the origin of the dwarves, of the curse of flesh, the evolution of humans, the old gods, the titans. These days, we got the chronicles to fall back up on, but back then, these were still the building days, and I would highly recommend anyone to just pay attention what the expansion gives you. So far, I haven't been overly invested in the classic expansions, but this one might be a bit different. We're definitely going to see. Right, that's neither here nor there, and I think we've been going on for long enough. Hope I was able to give you a good rundown as to the story that goes on in Wrath of the Lich King. And I'll also put down a list with videos I've done in the past, videos that go deeper into like the story of Tyrion, or Arthas, or Ner'zhul, or the Ashbringer, or stories like the Keepers in Ulduar. Links to that in the description down below. Oh, and don't forget, subscribe if you like my videos, leave a like if you enjoyed this one, and until next time, see ya!